with that, welcome to the Mysterious Library and the Untold Radio Network. I am Jason McLean, and next to me is the sexy beast known as Dr. Dean Bertram. How you doing, Dean?
I'm doing good, although I did get stung 4 times by a wasp today. So,
Ooh, that
yeah,
that can't be fun.
the same wasp. I was sitting on my couch,
Mhm.
going over tonight's book, actually, and all of a sudden, like zap, 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 just these 4 hits. I'm like, what on earth? It would happen so quickly. Yeah, there's a wasp
Yeah,
just decided to have a go. Go
that's the
figure.
thing about wasps. Like with the bee, you get stung. That's just the one you can get it out. You're done. Of course, they usually
Exactly.
attack in a group. Wasps, on the other hand, because they don't have that barb on their stinger, they'll just keep jabbing because they're jerks.
Yeah, they just kept
Yep,
hitting me and hitting me. Anyway, other than that, I'm fine. The swelling's gone down.
that's good. Did you get any Benadryl or just a
I did take a couple. So if I fall asleep during the show, it's because I sucked down that Benadryl.
excellent,
Yeah,
excellent? I know
but I
what to
shan't.
watch
I'm
out for.
excited. Oh yeah, I'm so whenever we do this, I'm so excited. There's nothing I like more than talking about books, and I couldn't think of anybody I'd rather talk about books with than you, Jason. So
You
that'll
need to
keep me
get out
awake.
way more. You need to get out way more.
I live in a cabin in the woods with my 6-year-old. I don't get out very much.
See,
Just saying.
if he got out a little bit more, he'd realize he could do this show with a much more attractive co-host.
It's kind of like being in prison, I guess. You know, your roommate starts looking pretty
Yeah,
good.
I'm basically the digital equivalent of what is it? Toilet bowl punch or toilet bowl wine?
We shouldn't joke about such things. Those poor people making their
Yes.
weird toilet bowl punch.
Yep.
But I can't wait to jump in to tonight's book.
Yeah, I let me say with, completely, this is of all the books we've discussed, we've basically got them down until uh December, really. I mean, almost at the end of the year. Like of all the books, of all of the articles and the videos, the documentaries that we've discussed, I have to admit this was the one that I was the most sort of like, hmm, and little bit of a tease. I thought going into this that I would agree with some things and disagree with others. And now that we've gone through volume 1, I disagree with some things and agree about others. It completely flipped me around, right? Because the things I thought we'd agree on, the things I thought we'd disagree on, it's like I actually ended up agreeing on things I thought we'd disagree on, but disagreeing with the things that we do agree on that I thought we'd agree on. And it's the book surprised me. But before we get into that, we should probably do our hot off the presses for the
We
evening.
should. So the book we're doing first, the actual book we're doing, though, we should mention it because
Yes.
it's a. Did we say the title? I don't know if we said the
No,
title.
we didn't. It's the
Well, no.
Ecology of Souls.
There we go. So that's the book you're actually
Mhm.
going to hear us talking about
Yeah.
tonight. That's the main book. But now we do hot off the presses.
Ecology of Souls, Volume 2.
Okay, so why we really
And the
decided to do,
companion.
and the companion, why we really decided to do it this way is we're going to return and do Ecology of Souls Volume 2
Yes.
is a full length, dissection by Jason and Dean at some stage in the future. But there's so much in these books, you couldn't do them justice to do it in one show. But we will
Yeah.
say that they're both available, as is the companion. And
Mhm.
Volume 2 is essentially, I suppose, putting UFO encounters and UFO belief inside a broader tradition
Yeah.
of death and near-death experiences and the afterlife and the like.
Yes.
And in many ways, the book we're doing tonight is required reading before you get to Volume 2 because it sets
Yes.
you up with the backstory. But they're both
Right.
fantastic books. And obviously, if you're going to buy them, they're really the same. They're really one book just divided into 2. It's not like they're really standalone books or anything. I think you need to get them both. And the note, if you're like me and you're somebody who wants to, read all the footnotes, know where all the sources came from, you'll need the companion because Joshua was quite famous for his extensive footnoting, his extensive endnoting, so much so that it actually required its entire own book this time to include all those notes in. And it's one of the
Yeah.
things which really makes, I think, Joshua's works stand out above so many other people in the field is that
Right.
it's referenced so heavily. He's not just inventing this stuff or
Yeah.
mentioning something and no idea
Yeah.
where the idea comes from. Any idea that's referenced which isn't his is footnoted. Every case which is in there is footnoted. And as
Yeah.
somebody who wants to really travel deep into the arena that he's talking about, those footnotes are invaluable.
Yeah. No, that is the one thing. And ironically, I think this kind of ties into next week's conversation, right? The art, we're going to be discussing the article that Lou Elizondo published last week. So we're going to do that one next week. But in his call, again, just to sort of how these connect, he is calling, in his call, it was for a much more academically rigorous ufology. And what Mr. Cutchin does in this, in it, because really it's one book broken into 2 volumes, is what this is. But specifically, what he's doing in these books is the hard work of actual academic writing, right? And that's something we need, that it doesn't happen often enough, and we need. And I think it was very, very valuable. To your point, how extensively footnoted this is. This was real academic research put into book form, and he does a beautiful job again from that academic viewpoint.
Yeah, and even for non-academic readers,
Mhm.
I think it's worth having something in front of you that sure, it's packed with theory, and we'll get to that, and some of the theory I
Oh
don't
yeah,
agree with. Some of it I think is great, but it's theory based on researchers who've also worked in the field. It's theories based on
hmm
historical, phenomena. It's theory based on current phenomena. It's theory based on a long cultural tradition and many cultural
yeah,
traditions. And if you don't recognize that in the work, the reader would have no idea, how much of it you were just confabulating, to be honest. So it's great that it's
right.
all in there.
Exactly. And we'll talk about that aspect a little bit when we get into our conversation about it. But yeah, I mean, so the point is today's hot off the press is volume 2 and the companion to the Ecology of Souls. But we're going to do, Ecology of Souls volume 1 tonight. And and again, because you do need to read them both. They are not standalone at all. And volume 1 is absolutely essential to understanding what he does in volume 2. So again, volume 1 is what we were talking about tonight. And Dean, I would like you to sort of do the breakdown on this one because,
Sure.
to your point, we sort of talked about this before the show. Interrupted Journey, there's a narrative going up, but this is an academic text. This is not a narrative the way we're sort of to a lot of people in this. Most of us, when we're reading these books, they're not academically written. They are written with a narrative. They're written with sort of that goal in mind. So why don't you give the quick breakdown, and then we can tear it apart, and I can it's like this is sort of the reverse. When it was Ken's book, you were you were the evil antagonist, and I was the hero of the story. But now we're reversed. I am now the Undertaker, and you're whoever the good guy's supposed to be.
You're bad cop, I'm good cop, in other words,
Yeah.
essentially.
One of these days I'll be the time cop, but today I'm the bad cop.
There you go. Well, as you mentioned, it is difficult to do any kind of narrative wrap up of this book, but essentially, what Joshua has done in this book is what the title of it suggests: Ecology of Souls, a new mythology of death and the paranormal. So he goes back, and I'm actually going to. There's so many. I'm actually
Yeah.
pulling up an overview in front of me now, which I normally would never do, because there's so many different
Yeah.
aspects of the paranormal and aspects of mystical experiences that
Mhm.
and until you see them in front of you, people who aren't really familiar with this material mightn't
Yeah.
know how much death intersects with all of these different belief systems. So he goes through near death and out of body experiences. Well, perhaps that's an obvious one. Psychopomps, which are the
Yeah.
type of spirit guides when you move in some traditions anyway,
Oh,
which
and we are
guides
going to
your
talk
soul.
about those pretty
Oh,
heavily.
yeah. Other soul traditions, other ideas about the soul, the relationship between fairies and the dead, which anybody who's familiar with folklore knows there's a long tradition of the
Right.
other crowd having connection with people who have passed over to the other side. And
Yeah.
then it rolls in from a general overview of fairies to fairies and death traditions, altered states of consciousness. So he looks at, for example, particularly the work of Terence McKenna. Terence McKenna, who's actually
Yeah.
the kind of patron saint on the cover of that book, was essentially he was he was somebody who studied and was very interested in the psychedelic effects of plants, but he
Yes.
he went to a degree where he saw the shamanistic and mystical potential. So McKenna, in many ways, is kind of a hero to a subset of the paranormal field who
Yeah.
suggested you can achieve contact with the other, achieve contact with essentially gray extraterrestrials he used to talk about
Yeah.
by
Mhm.
taking things like DMT. It talks about a range of
Yeah.
drugs, but DMT seems to be that kind of active ingredient which
Right.
triggers these things. And then that ties into shamanism, of course, which you'd achieve another altered state in shamanism, perhaps by sometimes they probably did consume drugs, but also by serious self-deprivation,
Yeah.
by fasting or by even the way monks,
Mhm.
for example. I can't remember if Joshua talks about that, but the way monks used to flagellate themselves
Yeah.
supposedly
Mhm.
had this type of effect on one's psyche and one's ability to see the other world as well.
Oh, yeah.
There's a chapter on mountains and monuments, the role that mountains play in UFO sightings, but also uh,
Mhm.
our own self-made mounds, like the mound builders in the Mesoamerican, mound builders, or
Right.
rather the pre-Columbian Native American
Yeah.
mound builders here, as well as similar things built in Ireland and all around the world. And then the
Mhm.
final chapter, he looks at death roads. So it looks at the idea of things traveling to the other world and the way that various folkloric traditions also have things like, fairy roads between forts, which it was dangerous to be on, or
Yes.
the
Yeah.
idea that Amy Michel, the famous French ufologist, who suggested there was a straight
Mhm.
line that UFOs traveled along, and how
Yep.
this all ties into the idea of roads to the other world. So a lot of, again, you have to read, as I mentioned when we were talking about volume two, you really have to read this book. I think first, if you want to get into volume two, I'll give the caveat. If you're a complete nerd who spent 10 years academically, like
Yeah.
myself, reading most of this material, if you already know Terence McKenna and you already
Right.
know Patrick Harper and you already understand Greg Bishop's co-creation theory and you're familiar with Carl Jung and you're familiar with, all of this type of stuff, you probably could skip it and jump straight into the second volume. That said, there was so many connections that I mightn't have thought of myself that Joshua's
Mhm.
brought together.
Yes.
And there's also so many cases within those traditions I was aware of that I hadn't
Mhm.
heard before. So again, the magnitude of the scholarship is what really, I think, three
Oh, yeah.
things, and then I'll move on. Then I'll let you respond. I think there are three things which really mark, I suppose, the magnitude of this book. One is the scholarship, which we were talking about already, the amount
Yes.
of research
Yeah.
which has gone into this, which is absolutely, it's just incredible. It's a vast, it's a truly I don't know how long it took Joshua to write this book, but it's
Yeah.
as good, if not better, than any, or certainly most academic dissertations that I've ever read on anything in this
Correct.
field. This
Yes.
could have been a PhD dissertation. In fact, you probably should find
Absolutely.
a university that will take it
Right.
and then instantly, oh, here's your
Yeah,
here's your
here's your doctorate.
doctorate.
Yeah.
And there are places that do those
Yeah.
kind of, I know I have a friend, I won't name him, but I think on the strength
Mhm.
of his writing, he actually ended up getting a doctorate. And I have very little doubt that Joshua would be able to do a similar thing. So there's
Yeah.
the strength of the scholarship. There's the fact that we need more theoreticians like this working in the paranormal and ufological field. There
We do.
just aren't. There are some people in academia who kind of, go down these paths, but the field is barren for real theoreticians. I think there's probably about half a dozen people working in the field today that are really worthwhile.
Yes.
Obviously, I think Cutchin's one of them, but most people aren't prepared to play with new ideas and to
They're
theorize and
not.
to make these
Yeah.
connections. And there were people in the past who I think were very good at it. John Keel, who's obviously an influence on Joshua. Jacques Vallée,
Absolutely.
obviously another influence.
Yeah.
Patrick Harper. So those people have done it, and still those who of them are still alive still do it to a degree. But there aren't many people who are working in the field who are doing that at all. And what
Right.
I sort of had 3 points, didn't I? The third point is that you d you don't have many books that give you such and forget about the actual quality of the scholarship or the theorizing. You don't have many books that put so much actual data points in it where you can even,
Yeah.
even if you didn't like the theory, like there are aspects of the theory I don't love, but I go, what
Right.
these connections, and there's so much in here. It's so rich for
Mhm.
further examination. There's so many ideas that start pinging off in your mind when you see these connections. So for those three facets, I don't know if I've read anything like this I don't know if I've read anything this extensive which has been published outside academia. The only person I think who
Right.
comes close, we'll get to it in a minute, and I'm about to give it to you, and that's Mike Heiser.
Oh, absolutely. No, absolutely. I had the same thought. But before we get into that, one last thing. Yes, shame on you, Joe. Shame on you. It's okay. I honestly didn't know this was it was Dean who introduced Mr. Cutchin's work to me, and honestly, I'm a fan. His work, his Bigfoot book, where the trackway ends or where the footprints end.
Where the footprints,
Um,
yeah.
yeah, I'm gonna have to get all the rest of his books now, because this is genuinely, I honestly the most excited I've been about a someone in this field in a long, long time. Honestly, the last person would be Heiser. And the only reason I would even say that maybe Heiser is slightly higher, or is definitely is higher in my estimation, is only because I think because of his theological work, right? And because that's very, very specific. But honestly, the only person he'd be second to is Heiser. I don't think there's anyone working in the field right now who has done the kind of academic work to the quality that he's done, and it's very, very well done. I cannot stress how much I was blown away by actually reading his material. To your point, it's like forget about it's like the scholarship is what we're talking about, but it's the amount of work he's clearly put into this, and he gives you the material not in his screwed up sort of I want it to look this way material, right? He gives you the material raw from actual academics who've actually talked to these people. It's not the what if we, when we talked about chariots of the gods, what's the number one problem? He's basically, and a lot of people do the same thing, is they're making stuff up half the time, right? It's well, this looks like this to me, therefore that must be what it is. You know, it sounds like that the visitation at Mount Sinai sounds like it could be a Titan rocket, therefore it must have been a rocket. Well, that's terrible. I mean, that's not what that is. He is saying this is what this culture actually said, this is what they believed, and this is how they interpreted it. And then you find the connections. Again, I cannot stress how important this is because and I am not one to talk about things like appropriation or I'm not, I again, not to get political at all, but like I don't get into that kind of stuff, right? I think it's actually very hurtful in the long run. But one of the things that I was listening to a podcast he was interviewed on, and one of the things he mentioned is you want to talk about appropriation, and I've actually talked about this on my other shows, is how once white European scientists come into something and say, oh, well, now this is worth looking at. Well, suddenly it's worth looking at, or hey, and this is honestly something I've talked about for a while now. I think we should separate Bigfoot from Sasquatch, and I think Mr. Cutchin actually gives a really good reason why. We'll go into that more in detail. But my point is, Bigfoot as a physical hominid, it's like that's what we, right, white Westerners have come up with. That's what we've seen. This is how we're exploring it. The Sasquatch and all of the sort of the connective lore, they did not interpret it this way. And I would suggest that in the field, what we are seeing is two separate phenomena. And I think we need to recognize it as two separate phenomena. And I think what we did is we said, well, hey, many, American Indian tribes, a lot of these First Nation tribes they have this sort of, lore that connects to what we think this thing is. So it must be the same thing. That is us putting our interpretation on and in just usurping a name in a tradition that is not, and that is remarkably disrespectful. Like the question of the Thunderbird. people say, "Oh, is it a pterosaur?" Like what I saw. Is it one of these large, giant condors that are described? I did again a recent video over in Texas from Porch. I'm like, hey, maybe that's the wrong question to be asking, because the Thunderbird in these First Nation mythology is like a creator spirit. They have different interpretations of them, and they're not treating it like it's a real creature that's running around. It is a clearly mythological character with religious significance. Maybe we should drop that whole question, because we're so busy focused on, is it this or is it that? Maybe we should say, why don't we move that name over out of the way, leave it where it belongs with the, and stop disrespecting the name of this creator being, and let's just focus on whether or not these other creatures exist, right? Because it confuses things. But in many ways, and I think his point is, the thing that I really liked is that he put them in their appropriate context. He didn't steal these ideas and then say, well, let me the new modern scientist guy put on my white lab coat and say, this is what's really going on. He doesn't do that. He gives you these cultures, he gives you their interpretations, and then works outward from that.
Yeah, and that's a big part of the strength of it. And also knowing that he isn't somebody ripping off other theoreticians or plagiarizing, because it's everybody that's influenced him, or everybody that he's taken things from is right there referenced on the page, which is of course again a very academic trait. You can't often in this field we hear people complaining about, he stole my idea, or that doesn't happen in university often, because if you do and you submit something and then somebody pulls out another paper written 5 years before, they're going to say, you either stole this, or if you didn't, how on earth weren't you aware of this, because it's so relevant. Now I think we both agree that we think this book is incredibly important. These books. And I think we both really like them. I think there's no harm in us being critical of the things we don't like. So I'll go first, because I think we're going to have slightly different things. And this isn't I shouldn't say that. I like this book. This isn't something that I don't like to qualify. This is something which I think could become a problem for somebody who went this route and took that as kind of the be all end all final solution. What for starters, there's probably almost nobody writing in the field today who is better at this type of comparative paranormal and folkloric stuff than Cutchin. I mean, he's done 5 or 6 books on it now, including these. So he really is able to find those commonalities and put together a very convincing theory. What I find, even when I'm writing on this type of stuff, or even when I was writing on it academically, is if you catch a tiger by the tail, in this case, the tiger is that it's the other world and it's death, and there's all these correlations, which there's no doubt that there is, right? I don't think anybody in this field who knows their stuff academically would disagree with that, right? And I don't think anybody's ever presented it as extensively as Joshua has done in these 2 volumes. But if that's your focus, then the tiger will take you down that trail. So you will see the death parallels everywhere, because they are everywhere. But if you grabbed a tiger that ran down a different trail, you could find an awful lot of parallels that implied something else. I'll give you one I don't even love. One I don't even necessarily love. And incidentally, I know Joshua doesn't love it as well. That's why I'll throw it out, because it's funny, is simulation theory. I like to play around with it. But the idea, and I'm not talking about the popular idea, as we've discussed, I think on your show, is the Matrix type simulation. But let's pretend there's an older Gnostic type not even Hermeticism, Neoplatonistic type of alternative reality, which is, or we're living in a lower reality than this higher spiritual truth. And so all these things injected into our reality, just like in a video game, a programmer can throw in something which cheats the system, or in the Matrix movie, you can be plugged into a device and you can be tricked. In these older spiritual traditions, what you were experiencing mightn't have been real. And in a way, this isn't totally contradictory to the books either, because I think there's space to go between them. But if you wanted to go that all of this life is not real in the sense that we think it's real. You
Yep.
can tick off an awful lot of the paranormal phenomena with that, and you can find previous extant religious and philosophical traditions that cover you when you do that as well. That's one
Yes.
example. There's certainly
Mhm.
others we could go down, and I don't think Joshua is necessarily saying this is the be all end all, but certainly it's such an important work and it's such a thorough work that you could walk away from it going, okay, well, now I subscribe to the idea that this is all related to death. I think it is all related to death, but I also think it's also all related to fairies, and it's also related to gods, and it's also related to
Right.
any paranormal thing you wanted to point your finger at in a way. So it's great to have this focus because it lets you do that theoretical work, which is so important in the field. But it's also for people who read it to, I think, be conscious of that there's other ways that comparative
Yeah.
folkloric paranormal stuff can be drawn out, and it doesn't in any way
Mhm.
dismiss the power of this book. It's just that, yeah, you can go down a comparative folkloric paranormal trail in lots of different directions, I think.
Right. I would, so here's where I would agree with you on that argument. Like you said, on that particular tiger, right, that he has. Um it's that I do agree that he grabbed a hold of the death concept too much. Now, clearly, it's absolutely connected. That's what I'm saying is like that was the thing that shocked me was how much when he laid out his argument, I'm like, he's really got something here. He does absolutely. My only critique is I think he focuses in a little. Now, again, not reading. I haven't read volume 2 yet, so maybe this gets cleaned up a little bit in volume 2. Leave that open, but since we're just focusing on volume 1, I do think that he because of the connections he's focusing on this one idea so much that he doesn't allow for you to your point other interpretations of the data and so w- I was surprised to find, and this is why I think the Terrence McKenna aspect is so important. I was shocked to see how much influence Terry McKenna had in this book. Um, and again, to your point, it's because it is so scholarly and he's tying in all this other material. You're like, okay, yeah, I've talked about Terrence McKenna. I haven't written about him in the books. I hadn't thought about including his work in any of my stuff. I'm going to have to now because he's got a great point. In fact, I'm probably just going to start referencing his works now, Mr. Cutchin's, because it's so dang good. But to your point, again, in the same way that we said, look, Ken, you said it was the essential guide, but you didn't talk about the paranormal stuff. That's a ding. So the ding I would put on Mr. Cutchin's work is, I'm sorry, Cutchin's work is we've been calling him Cutchin for like the last 2 months
Mhm.
behind the scenes, and so now
Mhm.
I can't get that out of my head. And now we discovered it's Cutchin's. I'm like, dang it. Um,
I'm super embarrassed because I've messaged back and forth Joshua many times. I've had him on Talking Weird, and I've always mispronounced it. And today, just before the show, it dawned on me, I think I'm mispronouncing that name. I better go and find out. I'm like, dang, I've been just mispronouncing his name for 2 years or however long it's been.
okay, next time you have him on, you got to invite me on so we can actually have this conversation. So either it's
Oh,
Cutchin
you
or
know
it's
what we should
Cutchin.
do? We should have him on this dissecting another book, have him as a special guest, not one of his
Yeah,
books. We should have him on Mysterious Library and pull out some really, some book
yeah.
which has clearly influenced him, like Patrick Harper's Demonic Reality, and dissect that with
Oh
Joshua.
yeah,
That'd be fun.
yeah. Absolutely. Okay, jump on that one, Mr. Red Hat. So, but to the point here again. Again, sorry, the whole Terrence McKenna thing. It's like his connecting that with death. It's like again, these are all brilliant points, but I think he just goes down too far. And the kin. Oh, it was the kin thing. It's like, hey, if you're gonna say essential guide, you got to include this. But if you're gonna include Terrence McKenna, you're gonna include this other material. You gotta throw out this other possibility. I think there's some possibilities and some avenues he could have gone that he didn't. He could have gone down. But back to the parts that we love about the book. Again, this is a minor nitpick. This is not a just because we're trying to be objective here and friends tell friends the truth. That's a big thing to remember. Now, that being said, one of the things that blew my mind because I'd never heard it. Again, I'm not a Bigfooter per se. I'm a generalist, but I don't think I've ever heard anybody when talking about First Nations Bigfoot lore or Sasquatch lore, he talks about how in Alaska that if the Sasquatch equivalent offers you salmon, it's a trick, and if you eat it, you stay in this sort of ethereal world forever, like you're trapped in Sasquatch land and you can never return. It's like as soon as he said that, I'm like, hold on, I have absolutely heard that in fairy lore. The lore of the Fae is, if you eat the food that's offered, then you stay there forever. And that's not just a European thing. Certain Japanese lore have, and of course, because the Japanese come out of China, there's obviously, similar Chinese lore, or similar lore. So it's like as soon as he told that story, I even jumped ahead. I'm like, hold up, bam, bam, bam. That's really three different. I mean, technically four, but really three different cultures that it's like instantly connects. And there should be no reason for them to connect at all. If you're talking about Alaskan natives, Western Europeans, and then the Chinese, and then of course the Japanese, like those are three completely unconnected cultures. And that right there is, again, we talk. He even talks about there are cultural universals. Is that a union thing? And I'm like, I'm not a big fan of Carl Jung, so I don't want to be too dismissive of it. I do think there was value to Carl Jung's work, but when you get that specific, I think we're outside of this idea of the cultural of a sort of just a general cultural universal, and we're into something legitimately real.
Yeah, that becomes the question, doesn't it? How much of it is the
Mhm.
collective unconscious? And that is one of the things I mean, I gave Cutchin a bit of a hard time a minute ago, but I think a lot of it is very
Mhm.
conscious of how much can we take this to be
Yeah.
a psychosocial thing, and how much is there an external reality? And obviously, I think Cutchin kind of, in sometimes sits in that middle kind of zone, but these books
Mhm.
clearly, I think, drift towards that there is an other world which we're
Mhm.
somehow intersecting with. And that's also its incredible value, because you don't get many people
Yes.
who are as rigorously thorough and as convincing as these books are, and
Yeah.
actually seem to be happy to drift, well, not even drift, go straight into the real potential that maybe the fairies are the dead. Maybe
Yeah.
ETs are the dead. And just to while we're on that point, and we were talking about McKenna before, we should just mention that Ecology of Souls, as
Oh
Cutchin
yeah.
says in the book, is based on a Terence McKenna idea that maybe
Mhm.
when we're supposedly interacting with extraterrestrials, we're really just interacting with an ecology of souls. These might just be the dead. This might be our
Yeah.
own other world here on Earth, other than this
Yeah.
and that's obviously one of the things, and I loved a lot about this book, but one of the things I love most is the idea that the whole extraterrestrial hypothesis is just so worn out. That's why we need books like this, to look at
Mhm.
other suggestions of what could be behind this reality. And to me,
Yeah.
that's what's so important about the book, is that we're not just, oh, here's another book about, a physical source from Zeta Reticula or something. This is actually saying, hold on, look how this interconnects with everything else. And obviously death is the entry point, because it does apply across a lot of these things. So
Yeah.
that's the one which is zoned in on. And that's wonderful. But to me, what I think I love most is that it's another nail in the coffin of extraterrestrial hypothesis, or at least in people who are paying
Right.
attention's mind. In the popular public's mind, there might never be enough nails in that coffin to close and put it in the ground. But those of us
Right.
paying attention, this certainly helps make us again go, this is a little bit, yeah, this doesn't sound ET to me. This sounds something
Yeah.
else.
Well, and allow me to again, I'm very publicly not a fan of the ET theory for a number of reasons. Again, extraterrestrial meaning a species that has evolved independently on a separate planet out in the galaxy. Okay? That's that definition. But a lot of what we're seeing evolve in the popular sort of zeitgeist about ufology is this idea of interdimensional beings, right? So I will say that that is something that's definitely been evolving, because you can't deny the oddity, the high strangeness that we're seeing associated with the phenomena. Again, do I think that extraterrestrials just being interdimensional? I've always said, look, I'm sorry, you've just thrown a sci-fi word, a Star Trek word, over a phenomena that you would have called supernatural 500 years ago. Right? It's like that doesn't actually, and you act like you know what that even means, right? You don't really know what that means yet. So, to his point, and again, I think we're both critical of the idea that he sticks to this idea of death. And that again, but that being said, he's not wrong. I mean, I think the thing I never called them psychopomps, so I was kind of unfamiliar with that specific word. But his work, but once he introduces the idea of the psychopomp and how that works and their connections to the Fae and these other in these different traditions, it's like, yeah, I mean, he's not wrong, right? The for those who are unaware, like I said, it's like I understood the concept, I just didn't associate the name with it. A psychopomp are these supernatural figures that usher you from life into death, right? Um, Again, in a lot of Asian lore, you think of the crow, right, or even a murder of crows taking a soul to the afterlife. The Greeks, you had Charon, who would usher the soul across the river Styx. You had Anubis, the Valkyrie, and even though, and he is right in saying that Christianity doesn't have a traditional sort of psychopomp, what did evolve is the idea of the angel of death, right? That's not actually, there is a death angel, but it's different from what is meant. But in popular Western culture, we have this idea of the angel of death coming to take you home, take you to the other side. So that's a psychopomp, and he makes a brilliant point that there is this tradition, and the same figures, the same imagery starts connecting to these same concepts, and we see it and we even see it in the UFO idea, right? These same figures, owls, birds, getting, someone taking you in a vehicle to another otherworldly space.
Yeah, I think all of that is of value in the book. And when I spoke about before, and we both said there's that maybe that focus on death, I should qualify that by saying we tend to look at it that way, and I think Cutchin's tried to escape this mindset, or maybe consciously, maybe subconsciously, because other things come into it. But and
Mhm.
he'd agree, I think, with what I'm about to say, is that in today's world, he does in the book, he says we've kind of dismissed death and its importance, but in
Yes.
the in the pre-modern world, or in other non-Western cultures, probably still today, is there isn't this kind of demarcation between different figures within this other realm. So maybe one of the things we're getting hung up on is, oh well, it's quite death centric, is that people people would have seen, and across traditions, that all of these things existed in the other world. You know what I mean? They mightn't have
Right.
thought that they sometimes they did think fairies were ghosts, or vice versa, or fairies were the dead, or vice versa. But
Yeah.
the
Will
fairies
o' the wisps.
inhabited,
Yeah.
yeah, the fairies inhabited this realm. You know, the angels inhabited this realm. The gods inhabited this realm. You know, there was this other place which wasn't our
Yeah.
standard mortal existence, and sometimes there were layers to the other world. I mean, you can see that in Norse mythology, where the gods might be up here and the trolls might be over here, and humankind's here and the dead are over here, and they're
Right.
all kind of they're all kind of put in different places. But when one thing is clear, they're not now. They come and go from our space, and all of these
Yes.
things come and
Yes,
go
yes, yes.
from our space. So I think it's tempting for me to say, as I did, don't focus. I mean, I don't think it's all just death, but there mightn't have been that demarcation by somebody 1,000 years ago. It would be like, well, it's all the same. It's all the other world. They're all
Right,
interacting, these
right.
other
Yes.
things. They're all not us.
Yeah, that is a great, great point. We see the same thing with ancient Hebrew. Heiser brings this out, right? The word Elohim, we tend to think of it as God or gods, right? Because that is what it is. But but really a better understanding would be spirit, right? Because um, the spirit of the prophet Samuel is called up, and he's called an Elohim. So it's the idea is spirit. We see this in again a lot of the First Nations tribes here in America, where you had the spirits, and then you had the Great Spirit. Where again, ecology. I've even used the story of or the metaphor of a food chain, right? Where it's like, look, you say the word demon or supernatural being, but we all think it's one thing. It's like, no, you may be talking about an entire, you know, ecosystem of very different creatures in the same way that if I were to say mammal, I could mean anything from a porpoise or a whale to a mouse to a human to a horse. It's like the word mammal means hundreds of different things, right? It's like we may be saying the same thing, you know. To your point, I think it's very, very well taken. To be for them, the dead, whether it's the fae, you know, spirits, angels, whatever, that they all belong in that other place that's not where we are. So maybe, and again, you know, maybe we are harping a little too much on the idea of death being the thing. But you're right. To someone 1,000 years ago, they wouldn't have seen there as being a difference between death or the dead, you know, the dead and these other supernatural beings. They just wouldn't have seen that.
Absolutely. And when you mentioned Heiser's work on the Elohim, that there's a plural and there's
The
a
singular.
divine council which God talks to, and there's
Mhm.
the gods of the nation, which are actually other Elohim who are in. There's only
Yeah.
one in the Judeo-Christian tradition. There's only one, creator, high God, Yahweh, or who we
Yeah.
call God. But there were all these other spiritual beings in various levels doing various different things. And when I made the point before that you grab a tiger by the tail and it will take you, where that tiger goes, you could grab the Heiser tiger by the tail, and
Yeah.
you could do a very similar kind of analysis where a lot of this stuff tied into the idea of there being a
Right.
divine
Yeah.
council, and the idea of
Mhm.
their idea of Nephilim coming, or the heavenly host coming down and breeding with women and
Correct.
having,
Yeah.
these offspring who then become spiritual demons after they die. And you can grab that tiger, and that answers a lot of the questions as well. So that's my only point. I do think there's a spiritual world. I think there's something which
Yeah.
is exterior to us. And I think this stuff has a lot of this stuff that we think of as physical is probably actually a manifestation of that, whether it's UFOs or whether it's cryptids or whether it's even things which seem somewhere in between fairies. I think
Yeah.
but I do think you can set up different kind of paradigms or different belief systems which can capture a lot of this stuff and do something
Right.
similar if you wanted to. That
Yeah.
said, he wasn't trying to write a book about, the divine council. He was writing a book about death. So in fairness again there, if
Correct.
that's your focus
Yes.
as a theoretician, then you should,
Mhm.
do everything you can to make that the major focus. And he certainly did. I mean,
Yeah.
I
Mhm.
can't think of how you could make that point better than in the Ecology of Souls books, to be honest.
I don't think you could either. I mean, honestly, there were, like you said, I went into it expecting to have where I figured I'd have conflicts and agreements. I ended up actually agreeing where I thought the conflicts would be because I'm like, you know what? He made a really darn good point.
Hey, here's a good
And
question for you just quickly, because
yeah,
this is
yeah.
this will hit the meat of the sandwich, I think. I know that
Mhm.
you are somebody very well versed in eschatology, and you're somebody who has a very firm understanding of the Bible, and you have very strong Christian
I mean,
beliefs. What were the
I'd agree
things
with that last one. I think I'm moderately well read.
Well, you are, but I agree. I think all those points are accurate. I wouldn't have said them, but just to
Okay,
rather
I'll
than
let you
us
have it. Yeah.
rather than us argue how qualified you are or aren't to answer the question, what were the things in the book where as you were reading it, you went, well, this I don't kind of agree with this as a Christian or as an eschatologist or as a biblical scholar. What were the things that conflicted with that position? Or maybe there was nothing. I don't know.
Well, yeah. Okay, so I think the biggest sort of element I would have a problem with per se is not actually necessarily in the details, in so much as and it's not even a disagreement per se. It's just the uh and again, this comes on the heel of me saying I don't think we should be usurping other people's folklore. We should be respecting it instead of trying to put our own ideas on it. Is that he kind of allows the folklore to be I don't even know really how to say this. I think he takes the folklore a little too seriously. And what I mean by that is, um, so actually my own work, right? In the stuff in around the Dallas Fort Worth Metroplex, I started realizing, hold on, I'm seeing the same exact wording, phraseology, and it's like I could trace all of it back to one story. It's like, oh, hold on, the Lake Worth monster. What happened is they took that and it became folklore, and they put it on this other material, right? The problem is when people discuss it, they discuss the folklore, what people, or what I would say is what people say is seen as fact, right? Um, Probably another way would be interpreting it as the folklore is an objective understanding of the phenomena. And I know that's not really what he's doing, but it came across that way, where he treats the folklore. I mean, I do think it should be taken seriously, but it shouldn't be necessarily regarded as objective. If that, I don't know if that makes sense, right? It's like folklore isn't an objective reality. It's a very specific cultural interpretation of phenomena within a certain mindset and time frame, and those things grow and change and evolve. And the problem is we often treat them like they're an observation of reality.
Yeah, it's a slippery slope. It's a difficult one to travel down. I
Mhm.
found this when I was doing my PhD as well, writing on UFO belief.
Mhm.
How do you decide what cases to look at? Do you focus on the popular ones, or
Right.
or ones which really fit the zeitgeist you're looking at, or whatever? And I think I see your point. I'm writing on something now, and I struggle with that now. Do I take
Mhm.
this at face value, or is this just a hoax? And if this is just a hoax, is this somehow still part of a greater imaginal collective
Right.
unconscious, so it's just as relevant to talk about? And there
Right.
were some cases and certainly in the first volume of Ecology of Souls, because that's what we're talking about, that I think probably you might not want to treat as factual, but I've done the same thing. One would be the Travis Walton abduction, which he
Oh
compares
yeah.
to, I think, a 15th century or 16th century disappearance of somebody from one
Yeah.
part of Europe who reappeared in Milan, and
Mhm.
saying there's commonalities. Now, I certainly know there's a degree of contention over what did or didn't happen to Travis Walton. And
Mhm.
obviously, a story from over 500-600 years ago is going to be, however long it is, 4 or 5, I can't remember the
Right.
exact
Yeah.
date, but
Yeah. Fact
there's going to
matter.
be some contention to the reality of that. But I think when you do this type of folkloric or paranormal comparison, again, maybe if the story rings true to the
Yeah.
broader narrative which has been told throughout history, it's worth including for that reason, regardless of the the I suppose, objective reality, because it's hard to even talk about. Here's the thing, when we travel down these
Yeah.
routes, it's hard to even talk about objective reality anymore.
No, it is. Like, and again, it's like that's why I didn't really focus on that as sort of like my primary complaint, because
Mhm.
it's to your. I think I have a feeling I know what you were going for, as far as where, as a Christian, that's where I would probably have my problems. But the thing is, because of the nature of what he was doing, I sort of put that to the side, because I get what he's trying to do. So for me, I'm like, okay, I can put my sort of Christian uh understandings and thought patterns and assumptions, let's put them over here to see what he's doing, because he's trying to come at, because he even does, he is a practicing Christian,
Yeah.
he has that mindset, and I'm like, but he's doing academic work here, so it's like I can't have that conflict, right? Because I see what he's trying to do, and there's value in listening to what other people say. There's value in hearing other cultures' interpretations, because then you can learn, and then I can take that and reshuffle that, what information I pull out of that into my worldview. But I got to take it for what it is. So I kind of put all that to the side.
Mhm.
I think my only complaint, if I really, again, on this idea is, and he's not the only one, right? Where folklore, I think, is taken as an objective reality versus saying, okay, hold on, this is a cultural understanding, and those are two very, very different things, I think. And it to your point earlier, it's a different tiger's tail that you've grabbed.
Yeah, it's interesting that Christian component of the book, because I don't even really notice it. If anything, I mean,
Right.
it's wonderful
Oh,
that in
yeah.
the afterward, Cutchin says, "I'm a Christian," and I think this is going to, maybe some people will look at this book and go, oh, it's a Christian influence book, and other people who are really, you know, conservative Christians or fundamentalist Christians are going to go, you've gone off the deep end, I don't like it. And it is a
Yeah.
difficult road for somebody to tread,
Yes.
examining this type of material, trying to put your own personal faith perhaps, you know, to the side and just looking at the data. And certainly he's done that spectacularly.
Yeah.
If I didn't know, I would never have thought by reading volume 1 that the author was a Christian. It doesn't read like, I've read plenty of
Yeah.
Christian paranormal material. This does not read like
This
Christian
is, yeah,
paranormal
it doesn't read like that at all. Like I said, that's actually why, again, from an academic standpoint, that's one of the reasons I love this book. Is the job of an academic is to give you fact, right? And to give you research. And that's important, because the problem I think we're so used to in not just this field, but every other field at this point, we're so used to the person's ideology and worldview front loading the concept that you don't actually get data. Everything becomes an opinion at that point. So that, again, that's why I kind of didn't really put my complaint as, you know, the way he handled the folklore, because in a way that's kind of what his job is in this book, is to give you that information. So which he did brilliantly, to your point. Again, regardless of what the phenomena is, we should be able to get the data first, and then you work from that. Instead of what most books do is they give you the opinion. I mean, heck, my next book, I'm literally saying, this is my opinion. This is the worldview. Here's how I came to that. That's how I came to that conclusion. Here's the phenomena for it. But what he does is, here's the phenomena. I'm leaving my worldview out of it, but let me just give you all the information. And then, like you said, if you were to read that, you would not read it as a Christian, right?
Yeah, for sure. I think that is hard, as I said, for anybody to
Yeah.
do. I think it's all. Here's another thing I'll say, which I think is kind of difficult and brave, to drop a 3-volume set
Yes.
for your average, in the average paranormal space. Like, I don't know. I mean, I hope. Listen, to be honest, anybody interested in this stuff should read all of it, cover to
Oh,
cover.
absolutely.
There's
Period.
no doubt.
Yeah.
Again, I think this is probably one of the most important books of its time in
Yeah.
our field. Maybe period, but certainly in our field. But to
Yes.
do a book which is, what's the first book, like 350, the second one's 400 pages,
Yeah.
and then
This is not a fast read.
there's appendices and notes of another few hundred pages. I mean,
Yeah.
that's an
Hmm.
it says an incredible feat, but it's also, I hope there's an audience who will buy all 3 books and read, and I mean a big audience. I mean,
Yes.
there's an audience, obviously, there's people like you and I and other people like us who buy
Right.
it. I hope people who would normally just pick up a standard, you know, today so much paranormal writing is a smaller word count for various reasons, but
Right.
I hope somebody who wouldn't normally pick up, I pick people who normally wouldn't pick up a 3-volume set or a 2-volume
Yeah.
and a notes edition, or a notes volume, will pick this up and read it cover to cover, because literally the first book, I was reading this and thinking, this is like doing a serious postgraduate course. Like, I can imagine this being taught at a postgraduate level, just the
Yeah.
first
No,
book.
I agree.
And
Yeah.
you'd walk away with this incredible understanding of the
Hmm.
centrality of death to the paranormal phenomenon, and your knowledge would go from whatever it was, would go from probably from here to here, and it would be, so you can literally get
Yeah.
a postgraduate level education in the dissection of paranormal and death by getting yourself a copy of the first volume and then going into the UFO, you
Yeah.
know, connections with the paranormal and death in the second. So
Yeah. Again, I cannot stress how important this work. This is literally one of the most important. Again, it's not just one book, but all 3 of them combined, right? Volume 1, Volume 2, and the companion are easily, I think, some of the most important work to come out in a very, very long time. Um, Again, obviously we've been raving about its thoroughness, but also the fact that he's willing to take what is a very frowned upon tack on this. I mean, if you want to make $1 million, just say these are grays from Zeta Reticuli, and you cherry pick your data. What he did was he gave us real data and said, hey, These connections exist. Like I said, the psychopomp connections blew me away. And it's like I hadn't put it in that context before. So, and this is me saying again, I think we probably agree more than we would disagree. I mean, if you were to sit us all down at a table, I think we'd end up saying we probably agree 95% on all of this. But even though we have that agreement, the connections he makes, I never would have made. And so this is why everyone needs to read these books. They are, if you want to be honest about the phenomena, you have to address what he's talking about here. Because if you don't, you're not being honest with yourself and you're not being honest with the phenomena.
And that kind of rolls a little bit into the Lou Elizondo that we're doing, the article that we're
Next week.
talking about next week, because while the gist of the article, we're not going to talk about it too much now, but the gist of the article is ufology is so broken it needs to be destroyed and rebuilt. But
Yep.
the ideas put forward are, well, it should be, it should be handled more
Mhm.
professionally. Now, I think we've already determined that Cutchin's latest work is the highest academic standard, but I'm not sure, and we'll get to that, if that's what Elizondo means. I don't know if the idea is to have
Yeah.
a more an approach where that alternative type of interpretation mightn't fit. I think if you built a paradigm of people
Yeah.
who agreed to approach the UFO phenomenon objectively today, if we look at the direction it's gone, I don't know if there'd be spaces offered to people at the table. But we're going to get into that
Yeah. We'll talk
next
about that
week anyway.
next week, but that's going to be a great conversation. So,
Yeah.
like, follow, subscribe, hit that bell. We're here every Tuesday at 9 p.m. Central Standard. And there are, what, 8 other really great shows on this channel,
Yeah.
including yours on Saturdays.
Yeah.
Talking Weird.
Talking Weird with my wonderful girlfriend and partner with Jen Durrell, and in fact, we've got Joshua. So if you enjoyed this, mark your calendar. Joshua Cutchin's coming on Talking Weird on the 22nd of October to talk about these books as well, which would be fantastic. What I would like to say quickly before, people think we're about to leave, because we're not quite yet, is there's a wonderful new feature on untoldradiom.com. You just have to go to untoldradioam.com and scroll down. Beneath, you'll see all the show icons, including Mysterious
Mhm.
Libraries, including Untold Radio's Talking Weird, Weird Encounters, Down South Anomalies, all the other ones, Pine Island Research. There's a bunch of them now.
Yes.
But if you scroll down below those, you can leave a recording. Now, you can leave an eyewitness recording and you can specify what show you
Yes.
want it to play on. But you can also leave a recording period there, because I was talking to Doug Hajek,
Mhm.
the
Yeah.
brains behind this operation, and his son Alex, who co-hosts, of course, Untold
Mhm.
Radio with Doug on Wednesday nights. Is it 7:30? I always forget the time of it's tomorrow
I
night anyway.
Yeah, I
7:30
believe so.
Central, something like that. But you could, if you want to leave us a message, leave that, and you might be interested in us talking about a report of yours, although we're not so much that show. Maybe you want to start a recording on that page and say, hey, why don't you guys look at this book? Or you might want to do a recording on that and go, I can't say I could have disagreed with you any more on that interpretation of your take on Interrupted Journey or on
Yeah.
Ecology of Souls. And if make it
Yeah.
brief, you don't need to tell us your life story. Make it a couple minutes, and we will probably play it on the show. So,
Yeah, we'd love to.
yeah. So go there again, untoldradiom.com.
Yes.
And you can leave us a message. If you do have a report you want to leave us on, if you're like, I had, like, say this week we were talking about near-death experiences and the
Yeah.
paranormal. Maybe you'll go, well, I had a near-death experience and I saw fairies. Well, that fits perfectly with what we were talking about tonight. Leave us that
Yes.
message, and there's a very good chance we'll play it.
No,
Not
absolutely.
tonight, but after we've downloaded the recording and listened to it and played
Yeah.
it next week. So yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Not tonight, but we will. And to that point again, untoldradiom.com. Go see it. There's all kinds of features. Again, this is a growing network of shows, but also this website is going to be able to contact you. It's going to be, this is something to be a part of. It's just starting out and it's going to be amazing. So on that note, I and Dr. Bertram here will bid you adieu for today. But we will be here next week. Again, same library time, same library channel, and we'll catch y'all at the stacks. See you.
Bye.